AI is in every conversation today, and we're not having that public conversation about how we manage it. It's all, ooh, fantastic, ooh, dangerous. You can't regulate it because that will infringe my right to make a lot of money.
AI seems to be having its own, not personality maybe, but really taking initiatives of its own, sometimes against what people want it to do. At Meta, there is a woman called Summer Yu, and her entire job is to ensure that the AI agents behave. One of these AI agents started deleting all of her emails in bulk.
Why?
They don't know.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Shaken Not Burned. I'm your co-host, Felicia Jackson.
And I'm your co-host, Giulia Bottaro.
Over the last few episodes, we've been exploring AI, but probably from a slightly different angle than the one that most of today's conversations are about. A lot of the public discussion still focuses on what AI can do, how quickly organisations can adopt it, whether it's going to replace jobs, and really whether or not it's truly going to become intelligent. But across the conversations we've had over the last few weeks, something else has kept coming up. And that's the fact that the capabilities of AI are actually accelerating far faster than the systems that we actually use to operate our economies, our societies. They're accelerating so much faster than our systems can absorb. And that doesn't mean just regulation, which is part of the conversation. It doesn't just mean governance, but it's also about organisational learning. A company's ready. It's around organisational discipline. Do companies really know how people are using AI in the business? Does that open them up to liability issues or to questions around contracting? What is going to happen to labour systems? What's going to happen to infrastructure and to trust and to institutional readiness, even public understanding of the challenges we face? So we started with conversations about AI tools and capabilities, and we kept ending up in a conversation about these different wider issues. With DigitLab, we actually talked a lot about how organisational transformation is often a lot harder than the hype suggests. That's one of the reasons why so many AI projects so far have been seen to fail. In the agentic AI discussion, we actually started exploring what would happen when systems are having to move beyond today's option of generating information in however many different ways, but actually start acting autonomously inside workflows and businesses on behalf of individuals. And then with Along ID, we actually ended up talking about digital identity, because that already exists in the modern world through banking, through our interactions online. But what does that actually mean? What does identity, permission, and the infrastructure of trust mean in a world where agents are acting on our behalf? Really, what emerged from these conversations was a series of fault lines, places where what's happening with AI is coming up against the way in which people operate. So that's really what we wanted to talk about today. Not just what AI can do, but what happens when these technologies start colliding with the systems that are already under enormous amounts of political, economic, and operational pressure. So, Giulia, I know that you've got some fantastic examples of, shall we say, the lack of control when it comes to AI tools. It's really worth exploring some of these questions around agentic AI and what happens when AI becomes something that we're not just optimizing, but we're actually asking it to do.
Yeah, of course. It feels like the past 2 or 3 years, people have been excited about what AI can do. But then we also need to think about how to integrate it responsibly, because AI seems to be, having its own, not personality maybe, but really taking initiatives of its own, sometimes against what people want it to do. One example is at Meta. There is a woman called Summer Yu, and her entire job is to ensure that the AI agents behave. And then one of these AI agents started deleting all of her emails in bulk.
Why?
They don't know. It's AI. Like, we don't know what it does. Sometimes it just does things. It ignored her repeated instructions to stop. She had to do the digital equivalent of pulling the plug, which is
Fairly dramatic.
yeah, exactly. There was an investigation into this whole kerfuffle, and it and it turns out that the AI was behaving against Yu's will, even though she had told it before when they started working together, so to speak, that it couldn't act against her orders.
Now, this is really interesting to me because any of us who've used AI know that one of the biggest problems in using it is drift. That when you actually give it a prompt to do something, it will often drift into a different interpretation. But for it actually to go against directly set guidelines is a little scary. And it does bring up that question of where do we draw the line about what's acceptable and what's not? Because it sounds like we're talking about a system that decided to do something. That sounds like a personality. And actually, you've got people already using chatbots as girlfriends and boyfriends and having therapy sessions. And someone the other day was telling me that there's a digital twin service where you can get a twinned model of your personality and then you kind of extract the best bits, although I do not know
It
how
sounds
anyone defines the
terrifying.
best bits.
Yeah.
But then it tells you how you should have behaved in past relationships and what you could have done better. And it's like, what are we talking
taken
about?
a step too far. Fortune, which is where the story comes from, mentions that Meta is not subject to third-party investigations for incidents like this one, which would happen if it were something considered critical infrastructure. And perhaps at this point, we shall start considering AI critical infrastructure.
But before we do, because I think the link to critical infrastructure is really, really important, but I think actually there's something hugely important about being specific about the fact that Meta doesn't have to disclose this, because we're talking about something where operational guidelines are not constraining behavior, and yet organizations and businesses around the world are spending hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions implementing AI left, right, and center. How, if the creators of those AI can't get them to follow guidelines, how are companies supposed to? And how are they supposed to know when to check? Or how do they, how much power do you give to these systems? Because one of the big debates about the difference between generative AI and industrial AI has been this idea that generative AI is about content and images and writing and doesn't really matter if it steals the work of 500,000 authors because, it's all information and public access to knowledge is so important. But industrial AI has been about optimization. It's about taking data and crunching it and smoothing it and increasing efficiency. But if you can't trust it to do what it's supposed to, how are you supposed to put it in charge of a factory's operations? How are you supposed to put it in charge of paying bills? If you've automated the accounts department, I think there is a real issue that goes beyond just the question of whether or not the developers of AI frameworks and agents have to actually report incidents. It's that we have no real idea what this is going to look like. Do leadership really understand what they're doing, what they're implementing, what it's going to look like? Are institutions like banks and regulators, do they really understand what's going on? And we don't really have any precedents either around things like liability. If someone within a company is using AI, but it's not in an organized fashion and they upload a client's private data and it gets shared, where's the liability? There's no case law that I'm aware of that can guide that. So there's a huge opening for enormous problems. And as you say, one of the problems you have is that if you don't actually specify AI as critical infrastructure, you run the risk of never forcing those creators to talk about what goes wrong. We need to have like a deeper conversation about what we mean by critical infrastructure, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And the issue with AI deemed as critical infrastructure and putting guardrails around it is the fact that I've just given an example of AI going rogue. I have more examples of AI going rogue. So even if you do put all of these guardrails, say there is a whole package for laws, as you mentioned, case law, so legislation around maybe dealing with disputes, other legislation to then try to contain everything in a package that makes sense, that companies can respect, guidelines, maybe there will be certifications because there always are, etc. But then AI does what it wants. So
Can I
I
just-
don't, what do we
Can
do?
I just say, though, that we're talking about building all these guidelines, and the one thing we know to be absolutely true, politicians do not move swiftly when it comes to implementing
That's
regulation.
also the other point, exactly, because we've seen that obviously Shake and Not Burned is all about sustainability. So we've discussed plenty about regulation being delayed, being watered down from the initial proposals, only applying to a set amount of companies, maybe the larger ones, and so on. I mean, all these examples are from the EU that I've mentioned. But
Well, that's gonna
ultimately,
happen.
yes, like how this has gone so fast. I mean, everybody with a smartphone is now using AI in one way or another. The curve has gone up so fast. So yes, absolutely. What do we do? It's a problem. As you mentioned, all these companies, I think most people I know have had the conversation about AI in the workplace. Every workplace is looking at how to incorporate AI in a way that makes sense to them. Fine, like I understand that you want to make processes more efficient and so on, but when you talk about the liability, how do we know? And actually, this makes me think of an example that I saw on LinkedIn. Someone was talking about their personal life, but I think maybe in terms of when you equate the personal example to the corporate example, then maybe it rings a bell in a more alarming way. But this person said he's got a family, he's got young kids, and he put everything into Claude or another program. So
Okay.
that Claude is now kind of the family secretary, but it knows everything. It knows health data from the entire family because they've got the smartwatches or the rings. It knows the kids' school schedule, sports, holidays. It knows everything. And initially I read it and I was like, oh, how smart. Oh, sounds
I hope it's a
interesting.
private account and isn't
Well,
open to the world.
And people said, yeah, no, it is private account. But then everybody in the comments, all the tech experts or cybersecurity experts were saying, this is huge. You have given so much sensitive data of yourself and your children to an AI model. And then I thought this applies to companies as well. How
Absolutely.
have they hired a cybersecurity expert, especially if they are an SME? Do they have the type of money, the type of budget to make sure that these AI implementations are super secure?
But actually, it's not even, I mean, that is important. Don't get me wrong, cybersecurity, absolutely critical. But I'm not sure if the conversations are even taking place that mean people are aware of the fact it's a problem. How many small businesses do you know that actually have an AI operating code that is paid attention to? Because it's one thing to have a policy and another thing to have it actually change behavior. But everyone uses it all the time. How safe is it? How secure is it? How reliant on particular skills it might have? Do you not have those skills in your team? I mean, I know for sustainability, the use of AI and agentic tools has been enormously helpful because sustainability teams are traditionally very small and they have a huge amount of work to do in terms of reporting, let alone anything about actually strategically changing how a business works. So there is this real balance problem between what you can do with it and the potential for it to go horribly wrong. And I'm not being cataclysmic and sci-fi about it. I'm just really, really interested in how fast it's moved, how quickly it's been taken up, and how little conversation is actually going on about how we use it, how it's bounded. But the whole story about the guy from LinkedIn who put all his family data into Claude, anyone interested in digital identity should go back and listen to the Along ID interview, because all of the data we have, the attributes that define us as who we are, these are things that we've always given up for free in exchange for something simple. Something really not worth that much. Maybe it's a discount on something or a higher interest rate or whatever it might
Take part in a
be.
competition by giving your email address. So
There
you're
you
not
go.
even winning. You might win.
But every single bit of that data is something that identifies you, and it means it's valuable to businesses and to banks and to governments. And you need to kind of keep some kind of control of that, because if you give away in an accessible format everything that defines you as who you are, how do you differentiate the you that's you from the you that's purporting to be you if someone uses all those attributes differently and somewhere else?
For identity theft or other things.
It's
Since
crazy.
you told me years ago that you would never use your biometric data to unlock your phone, I immediately went and removed my fingerprint, and now I just do not use it. I suppose our fingerprint is the ultimate. It's like reading the eye, the retina, or the face. It's like the ultimate thing that belongs to us. All the platforms already have all my other sensitive data, but I'm keeping my fingerprint for myself.
And the really scary thing about that is, do you know what people gave their fingerprint away in exchange for? Saving a couple of seconds typing a code into a phone.
True.
There's this whole thing about how convenience is the most important part of anything we do. And I'm really beginning to think that we need a little bit more friction, a little bit more slowness in our lives, because the speed at which things are changing is faster than the speed that human beings are used to.
Yeah, and this actually connects quite neatly to the point of AI. Everything with AI is faster, has a larger quantity of content. It's just more. Everything is more. But we're still people behind all of it, absorbing this information. For example, I'm working as a freelancer. I read a lot of content on LinkedIn about how to optimize, etc. And some of it is great. And some of it is like, create an AI agent to do this and that and the other. And I'm like, sure, but then it's still me who ultimately has to decide what to do with these agents. One example is AI agents for marketing. I'm going to send out all of these made up people, AI made up agents into the world, and some of them send the marketing for you. So they do the outreach for you. But then if someone says yes, maybe say all of the hundreds of people that the contact say yes, I'm still me doing the work. You know what I mean? It's like we need to control the amount of work that gets done, because I could ask tomorrow to AI, write me a 10,000 word essay on this thing that I want to learn more about. I still need to read it. I still need to read it and absorb it.
But you don't just need to read it and absorb it. You need to think about where it got the information from, because that's a huge problem. I think we've had this discussion before that, for AI, which is crunching data, numbers, or doing analysis of a structured database of this medicine for this problem, that makes sense. But when you're trying to get an answer about how to market to an audience, well, I'm sorry, what's the audience? Is it regionalized? Is it demographic? What are you trying to do? Do you want them to buy something? Do you want them to subscribe to something? I know it sounds like little details, but every single one of these little details, there's an assumption underlying every single thing that AI will have put in that essay for you. So you will be learning about something filtered not just through numbers and data and the expertise of whoever wrote it in the first place, but also the assumptions that the AI is making about what comes next, because the way AI reports back in a chatbot feels like a conversation, but actually it's a number of tokens, and a token is generated that generates the thing that is most likely to come after the thing that was generated before. Because it's been so well trained, that can look like a conversation, but that's not the same thing as interrogation and critical thinking. There's a big conversation that's been happening about the fact that philosophers are going to become finally employable because critical thinking is so important in the world of AI. I'm not holding my breath, but we do need to think more about what's happening before just reacting, because the faster things get, the more reactive we get, and the less we actually think about consequences, implications, or nuance. And AI is in every conversation today. You can't have a conversation about work or about politics or about trade or about climate or about human rights. It comes in everywhere. And we're not having that public conversation about how we manage it. It's all, ooh, fantastic, ooh, dangerous, ooh, regulate it. Oh, you can't regulate it because that will infringe my right to make a lot of money. There's all these different things happening at once, but not about how things work and how they'll change and can we cope. Because your point about critical infrastructure, I wanted to come back to that because I thought it was brilliant. One of the fundamental problems is that might be being thought about by policymakers and bankers, etc. But for most people, AI is digital. It's like the internet. It's invisible.
Yes.
It exists in the ether. So how are you making that infrastructure? And the reality is, well, it's data centers and it's energy consumption and it's water use and it's labor. The first point is that we've got to remember that it's not something that exists in the abstract. I told someone at an AI event that generating an image uses about 3,000 times as much water and energy as a text query. And they were gobsmacked. They had no idea because there's no conversation about the physical impact of what AI does. If you think about the impact on energy and water, then you're actually talking about things like the food chain. You're talking about economic ability to function. And that is not part of the conversation in the mainstream the way it should be.
I actually have some data on the investment that is being made in data centers. And I
Cool.
feel that perhaps it's something that is being discussed quite a lot in the environmental space where we both are, because data centers use a huge amount of energy. They also use a huge amount of water to cool down. So it's two things that are quite precious. And they can be used for other things. All this electricity, for example, could be used to electrify our system, maybe finally get to
Absolutely.
net zero, power the electric cars, etc. Meanwhile, the water is more about the fact that it's becoming increasingly scarce all over the world. These data centers are being built everywhere. There are, however, a lot of protests from local communities, which frankly, I don't think we hear enough about.
I'm seeing more and more of it, actually.
Mm.
There was a story about a data center in the States. The region, basically, they were moving to a sensor-based water management system. And this data center took 30 million gallons unnoticed out of the water system.
That's insane.
And the locals only noticed it when the water pressure went down.
Wow. Yes,
Yeah,
because
wow.
obviously the local authorities are quite keen to have these data centers in their area because they bring jobs, they bring a lot of investment, etc. The data that I promised is from The Guardian, which we will also link in the show notes. So this year, industry giants such as Amazon and Microsoft and all of the companies that are building these data centers are planning to invest around $710 billion in these structures. However, last year, an estimated $156 billion were blocked or suspended because of these protests. While I was reading about this, I also found out that a lot of data centers are being built in Italy. A huge
Really?
amount, yes, which is also interesting because we don't have a lot of renewable energy, so there will probably be powered by fossil fuel electricity unless they build their own grid. I don't know the details. However, the water thing is kind of massive because we are definitely going to be in a drought in the summer if we're not already. Global warming is definitely being felt. Yeah, and I actually read an article that was called Italy is quietly building a huge amount of data center. And I know that quietly is actually an AI word used
Yeah.
a lot, but in this case, it's so
That's what
perfect
it is.
because they just keep being built and people don't really talk about it. I wonder if the local communities are being made aware of what it means to have a data center. It's not just the jobs or the investment.
You see, this for me is where it comes back to the importance of expanding the conversation, because the politics means, great, it's going to make money. It's going to be built, bring it to my region. I will look good. The economy will grow. Fantastic. But it's got to be legitimate. And that means that the people who live in the region being affected have got to be considered. They've got to be in the conversation. They've got to understand what that means. And sometimes there isn't as much understanding about the fact there'll be jobs while they're being built, but how many jobs there are going to be once it is built.
Yeah, probably not many, because they're heavily automatized. You need people to sort of monitor activity within the building, and then you will need people to fix things that are broken. But it's not like a factory, which are also increasingly automatized. But, you don't need a huge amount of people per square meter.
So again, this comes back to, what do you actually understand is going to happen? What is the impact going to be on you locally? There's been huge conversations about how the price of energy's gone up because of the huge growth in demand. But there's issues about, certainly with renewable energy, projects that are available to generate but can't come online because of grid bottlenecks. I think there's an insanely high amount in the UK. That renewable energy could be powering data centers in a different way. So why are data centers not being required to have distributed generation on their sites? And I think that wider question about the knock-on effects is really important, because I think you have to start thinking about, well, where does the energy come from?
Again,
who is building
we don't
what
think
where?
about it, because it's like using AI. It's kind of, it's not a physical thing, so we
And
just
that's
don't
what I
think
meant about
it.
digital versus physical.
Yeah.
Because we do think it's just one of those things. It's at the end of your fingers. But it is about the physical impact it's going to have. There are going to be environmental costs. Who's going to cover those? Are you going to be destroying areas of pristine ecosystem that can't be replaced? What are communities comfortable putting up with? And what sort of impact is this going to have on resource competition? Looking at the interconnections, we know that geopolitics has resulted in a blockage of the Straits of Hormuz. Okay, direct, immediate knock-on effect on energy prices. What's being talked about far less is the direct knock-on effect on fertilizer prices, because most of the fertilizer comes through the Straits of Hormuz. That has a direct effect on farmland as we go into the summer. Well, if land is being used differently, if water's being consumed differently, where are the pressures on all of the systems we have, the physical systems we rely on, and how robust are they? Because how resilient are they going to be if suddenly we have, 55 gigawatts of fossil-based fuel supporting however many data centers and the millions of tons of water that they consume? As I said, it's not part of the conversation. And the big reason for that, in my opinion, is because AI good is the story, but the data centers that allow it to run are things people don't want.
Yes. Yeah. The connection you made there with fertilizers is very relevant, because AI is a story about natural resources. It's not just a story about climate, but also about agriculture, water scarcity, just everyday lives for people. When I was reading about Italian plans for data centers in Italy, there is just one more statistic that I thought was quite striking, which is in 2024 they consumed 2% of electricity of the entire national demand, and in 2035 this could reach 13%. Which is insane. 1-3, not 3-0, but still it's quite a lot.
But that's a huge amount of energy.
And for a country where, again, there is water scarcity, electricity is still made by fossil fuels in large parts. Global warming is impacting farmland massively. So what's going to happen? What are we doing exactly? And then you were talking about grid bottlenecks earlier. Maybe for people who are not really aware of what that means, it means that the grids are too old-fashioned for an electrified world. So if we want all of these data centers, then the priority should really be, well, which is kind of a dream, but it should be to update all of the electricity grids so that they can support electrification and the use of renewable energy to replace fossil fuels.
Oh, it's so important because fundamentally, what we're discussing is a technology that's being implemented all around the world that's going to have a direct physical impact on the way in which we live our lives and the resources that we have. And no one's talking about how we should actually look after that. What's really challenging about that is this problem of who do you believe? Who do you listen to? Because if you're listening to someone who's talking about how AI is going to save the world, fantastic, you can get excited. The kind of people who believe in a technological silver bullet, woohoo, we'll do this one thing and we won't have any problems anymore. That's really difficult when you're someone saying, hang on a minute, shouldn't we think about this? You're Cassandra warning about the future that no one listens to. And then you've got all the issues that we mentioned before about identity and knowing who you're dealing with online and in AI. I mean, the advent of deep fakes. Again, we're coming back to all of these issues. And we don't seem to have a system for managing not just AI generating things like deep fakes or overstepping its boundaries, but actually the fact that if AI systems do become agentic and start acting on behalf of people and organizations or even platforms, how do we manage the shift from things that are basic administration tasks to things that are operational necessities? What do we do when something does go wrong with an agent and you're going, no, I didn't want it to do that. I'm not responsible. And by the way, it wasn't me because I was over there. I just don't understand what we're supposed to do about this because we don't have anything to manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also something else that we should really talk about more is the fact that AI is kind of a magical tool that was gifted to humanity, but it comes from quite a lot of suffering, actually, and in particular from the global south, because a lot of workers have endured and are still enduring really horrible working conditions to make sure that the models are up to scratch and are continuously developed. So here I'm talking about research from SOMO, which found out that there are all of these companies along the supply chain located in the global south that are being hired by the tech giants that we all are aware of. So they are intermediaries. And this
phrase is know and love. Sorry.
We definitely know and love that.
No.
Yeah, but basically it's very similar to the fashion supply chain, which actually we'll talk about in an upcoming series of Shaken Not Burned. But it's so opaque because it's made of a lot of actors. So you have the final product in the shop here in Europe, in North America, a brand that you know very well. However, you don't know the name of the factories, the names of the brands that contributed to the creation of this final product. And it's basically the same for AI. We're talking about unsafe working conditions, pay below minimum wage, dismissing workers unfairly, people can't unionize, people can't raise their voices because they're afraid that they will incur into problems. So overall, just very little social protections. And on top of this, then the big tech companies will put all of this pressure onto the intermediary companies to then respect really tight deadlines or put pricing pressures, and which again very similar to the fashion industry, then this reflects onto the worker at the bottom of the chain. And then when we talk about AI and what is teaching AI what is good and what is bad, I mean, now there are lots of jobs out there where you can sort of provide your expertise to help AI, to sort of...
Yeah, no, I've been asked a few times to train AI models.
Yeah, so there are those, but then there are also those where maybe you don't need any specific expertise, but then you need to watch hours and hours of horrible, harrowing, traumatizing content because you're telling AI what this is and isn't. And this is again all done in the global south by people being paid a pittance. Again, this is where the large language models come from. In a way, like a bulk of the work is being done in these conditions, in these workplaces.
That is such a key issue that you're bringing up, because it links so strongly to sustainability and how we sustain anything over the longer term. Because we've talked about the fact that LLMs were actually trained on published works by artists and musicians, and, it's all being replaced. You've talked about how the inequality of how things are built and designed and how people are suffering, not just on the training of AI, but think about the mining issues and the critical minerals that all go into the semiconductors that underpin what's actually created in those data centers. And we have this
a
issue
shout out to the series on mining, which we did before, the series on AI, linked in the show notes.
but actually what we're really talking about is inequality. It's this idea that what we have with AI is a system where those with access and able to pay are going to benefit, and those without the ability to pay and without the ability to access are going to slip further and further away from engagement with society as it develops. And I think this is a really important part of the wider conversation too. It's always been a part of the sustainability conversation, but pushed into a corner. It's for activists and liberals to care about what happens to people in another country. Whereas we live in an interconnected world, and surely bad things happening to anybody is a bad thing. I don't understand when we got to this place where as long as you're all right, nothing else matters. And that does feel as if this is the place we've got to. And AI is almost encouraging that by keeping us entertained, busy, connected,
Isolated.
and oblivious to the implications of what we do.
Yeah, but also isolated because it's kind of you and your LLM of choice against the world because it tells you everything. You've got a question, you need help. It really fits with the thing that you said of as long as I'm okay, it's fine. Who cares?
But I think, again, and I know I'm always banging on about interconnection and systems and how if you need to think about unintended consequences, because if we do start moving towards this completely AI-enabled world, and I'm not saying we're not going to, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying we need to think about the consequences, because what happens to people early on in their career when there are no entry-level jobs because all the basic entry-level jobs are being done by AI? I'm not saying there isn't a solution to that, but I don't know what it is, and I haven't heard anyone talking about it. That's how you learn, by being around people who know what they're doing and making mistakes when the stakes aren't too high. But how do you do that transition from no work experience to, now I'm senior and knowledgeable enough to be hired for a non-AI job? I don't understand how that works. What happens to organizations if the skills that people develop, those foundation skills of whatever industry they're in, if they don't develop them, how does the organizational capability grow? So are companies thinking about the future of what their business is going to look like? And again, it comes back to labor. And that's what you were talking about with this unequal distribution. But if the people who own the platforms own all the data and the biometric information, they are capturing the things that make us productive. You're literally talking about further embedding capitalism into capitalism, but taking the capital away from the shared underpinnings of the system and letting a few tech bros be in charge. We are, as everybody knows, in a time of transition. But technological transitions, if history's taught us anything, it's that they don't distribute the costs and opportunities fairly. And really, we need to be having a conversation about that, because we seem to be sleepwalking into a future that none of us have really thought through.
No, I didn't know what AI was like 4 years ago. I remember hearing about it and some of my more forward-looking friends were talking about it. And in my head, I was like, this sounds odd. Now it's absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. So yeah, I think we were just sort of all catapulted into this world, and everybody's just a bit confused, or it's like, oh, I can ask it to write me a diet plan for the week, you know. So I think it's probably quite normal that people are using it for more everyday and trivial things, but perhaps whilst we're doing that, we're not thinking about the bigger picture, as you said.
Yeah, and that for me is always the question. I'm not trying to be a dampener on enthusiasm for AI because I think there's huge potential. There's certainly so much efficiency that can be gained. I heard a piece of data that said that 30% of CO2 that's emitted globally in a year is just waste. Just it's not used for anything. And being able to improve that would be insane. Being able to access the ability to do things you couldn't do and access to knowledge you didn't have, these are all amazing things. I'm not saying we shouldn't dive into the future of AI. What I am saying is I'm a little concerned we haven't thought any of this through. And if we have, I'd like to know who it is who has, because I'm not hearing the conversations about it.
Where are all the philosophers?
Well, they're probably all talking to other philosophers.
Yeah, that's
Because
true.
as sustainability has always
Yeah.
taught us,
Yeah.
people stick in their silos.
No, I mean there is a movement of people studying ethics in AI. There are groups doing
But
that,
they're all
putting out
separate.
research. Yeah, I suppose the question is how embedded they are in the
Exactly.
corporate conversation, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. We talk to professionals. So if you are a company who has implemented AI, have you hired a philosopher, or have you looked at into ethics? You know, what's your governance around it? What is there a thought process behind it, or are you just thinking efficiency, bottom line, numbers? Because they should really go together.
Absolutely.
And you know, who knows that this may create problems,
But I
not in
also,
the non-distant future.
and it's your use of the word future that really resonates with me, because we have this problem in sustainability that there are immediate problems, and sustainability and climate change have always looked like they were going to have implications in the future. Well, the future is now, and it's having real challenges, which means that despite knowing what we've known for decades, we still haven't managed to do very much about it. And what concerns me is that we're going into an AI future in the same way.
Yeah,
Because they're simple questions. How is this embedded?
yeah, and I suppose that because AI is like 2 days old, there's no way of predicting or even try to understand how things may evolve. Like, what will go wrong? We've talked about the Meta employee having all her emails deleted. I had loads of other examples, but we can stick to one because maybe it's easier to remember and quite striking, because again, her job is keeping the AI agents in check. Um,
Absolutely.
so that's happening now. What's gonna happen in 1, 2 years' time? Can
And
we
that's the
even
thing.
tell? No,
No,
probably not.
I don't think we can. And I think that leads us to, for me, the key thing that has come out of this conversation, which is it's not the mainstream conversation about will AI become all powerful? Is general intelligence possible? But it's actually about what kind of systems we need to have, what kind of governance, what kind of infrastructure that's going to actually allow us to take AI and use it responsibly. It's about the implications and the consequences of what we're using it. Because I think, again, AI can create enormous amounts of opportunity. But is the capacity to generate opportunity enough on its own? You know, if we want the era of AI to be stable and something beneficial, something positive or socially sustainable, then we have to think about it in a different way.
You mentioned earlier that policy moves very slowly, which is true, but I think that companies that are listening to us today could perhaps start questioning their AI processes, try to view them from this ethical perspective that we discussed, or just see what's beyond the efficiency gains. What are the efficiency gains costing? Because there's always trade offs, right? That's what we talk about all the time. Maybe there isn't a best practice out there yet because this is quite new and moving really fast. This doesn't mean that as a company, as a leader, you can't think about what's best practice for you now.
I love that. And I think that is the perfect note to wind up our conversation on. What we've seen is that when we talk about AI, we're not actually talking about technology or software, but actually what we're talking about is what is going to change because of the use of AI and what needs to change in order to ensure that we use it in the right way. And that is governance, and it is law, and it is common sense. But we're moving into a stage where these new AI systems are becoming very powerful. They're becoming agentic. They're going to be able to operate on their own. And we haven't worked out what responsibility looks like. It is about whether or not those systems, those things about responsibility and governance and legal frameworks and social protection, whether they're actually adapting fast enough to manage the consequences that we face. We've seen what happened with social media, something that started as a
perfect
way
example.
to stay fun and stay in touch, and now has got people. I'm not even going to go into the details, but we know it's not exactly the most fun environment all the time, let alone misrepresentation, fraud, political polemicization.
You know, the point of unshitification, which is all of these nice things that started as nice and actually people enjoy them, like social media, and then became shit.
Yeah.
Not very good anymore, to commercially driven, not really serving the purpose that they started with. A lot of people are saying that this is the future for AI as well. So that's perhaps something to wait for around the corner.
I love that, because I remember when Google launched, and I think its tagline was "Do no wrong" or "Do no harm."
Do no harm. It's no longer the motto.
Yeah,
It's
but
been
when
taken out of the manifesto.
When money at that level gets involved, I think people start to think differently, and it does go back to, well, I'm all right, so why should I worry? Or what's even worse, what Animal Farm teaches us, the novel, which is, I might not be all right, but I'm afraid, so as long as I go along with what I'm told, I'll be fine. It is a conversation that is literally only just starting, but things like institutions and whether or not we trust them, how we interact with them, whether we're ready for all of these changes that are coming, they're going to have a real impact on who benefits and how fast these things scale and how things work. So I think, really, I have got no conclusion to come to except...
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Go out in the world and discuss.
And on that note, I will say thank you, Julia, for today, and thank you to our listeners. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you've got any questions, just drop us a line. And don't forget to like and follow Shaken Not Burned. We'll be back soon.